Okay, thanks everybody for waiting. We're going to get started with our webinar right now. I'm Tim Hall, co-founder of Simporter, and I'm delighted that you're all able to join us today. With me is Dave Donan. We're delighted to have Dave join our webinar. Dave is a partner emeritus with A.T. Kearney. And when he retired from A.T. Kearney, he was senior partner and the global leader of their food, beverage, and agriculture practice. He's currently an adjunct associate professor at Northwestern University and an active investor and speaker in food and consumer products industries. Dave has 40 years experience in both executive roles and consulting practice in the consumer products field, covering all facets of the industry from North America to Europe and Asia. Dave's a featured speaker on global food supply, on economic trends, and the changes in the food industry. And I had the pleasure of joining Dave when he was the featured speaker on a panel last year that was sponsored by Plug and Play from Sunnyvale, California. And I learned more in that 40 minutes of listening to Dave than I had in the prior year. So Dave, welcome to our webinar. We're really glad to have you.
Well, thanks, Tim. I'm glad to be here and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
I think the way we're going to proceed for the attendees is we're going to run through some slides, and I'm going to do a little bit of talking on each slide, and then we're going to ask Dave for his perspective on what's really going on in the industry. The data I'm going to show you comes from Simporter's own proprietary method of collecting data. So we examine what consumers are saying, both in product reviews on e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Walmart. And then we also examined what they're searching for on platforms like Google. And we examined some social media components. And we kind of cross-analyze that data to get a sense of where are their minds headed today? What kind of actions are they taking in the marketplace? So you'll see us showing some data, which comes from our own methods. And then there's some other data that will share what its sources are. And I'm going to run through some slides. I'll go through a few of the slides, and then Dave, I'll have you give us your opinion on what's really going on behind the scenes here with consumers. So let me give a shot of sharing my screen. See if this all goes smoothly on Zoom. And folks, if you have questions, you can write them in. Either I'm going to check both the chat and the Q&A screens, but only after we've gone through the slides. I'm not going to go through them as we run through the slides, but at the end, we'll have some time to kind of cover these. We're going to go through 8 basic areas about food and sustainability and some of the trends today. So let me just project my screen and start this show. So I recapped this methodology very briefly, but we looked at 818,000 or so product reviews from Walmart, Amazon, and Kroger, examining 6 different food categories, looking at large categories ranging from prepared meals like meal kits all the way down to grains like rice or even beans. There's over 4,000 products examined. What were consumers writing in product reviews about those 4,000 products? And that encompassed 769 brands. And in many cases, we cross-analyzed that data with consumer posts that were written in Instagram and Facebook, as well as with search terms for some of the keywords. So it's a very large amount of data, and we use AI to compartmentalize that and understand what consumers are saying. So our first topic for Dave comes back to clean and natural foods. Obviously, it's a hot area right now, but when it comes to clean or natural foods, where should the marketers focus? You'll see a lot about positive attributes: green, organic, plant-based, that sort of thing, certified organic. But then the other side of it is this product does not include the absence of negative attributes: no gluten, low carb, no refined sugars, allergen-free. And when you look at products in this industry, they tend to do a little of both. They tend to have some of these positive attributes, and they tend to promote the negative attributes when they have those claims to make. But when we look at what consumers talk about, we flip that script and say, well, what are they writing about in reviews? They're going to mention the positive attributes 3 times more often, 3 times more frequently. Something that's on that positive side comes up. But on the other hand, the negative attributes, does not contain, free, those are growing faster. So if you're a marketer, do you just sort of put both in the bucket, or do you focus on one or the other? What's better, to have a product contain the positives and omit negatives, or some half of that? And when you think about new entrants, is it likely that they care more about omitting a negative? Is that what's going to drive them to trial? A couple of charts, and then we'll get Dave's opinion on this. This is an analysis of the positive attributes, different versions of them that are growing in product reviews. So for example, a bunch of keywords around green food, a bunch of keywords around organic or nutrients and so forth. And then how many times that attribute's mentioned in product reviews from that 8,000 product sample we mentioned. So if you look at these positive ones, there's 19,000 positive reviews in that data set we had, reviews about positive attributes, and they're growing about 10% past 6 months over the last 6 months. So positives, a big chunk, growing about 10%. But now let's look at the negatives. They add up. This is gluten-free, carb-free or low-carb, allergen-free, toxic-free, no toxins, no added sugar. They're all negatives. Those are a smaller portion. We had 19,000 attributes. We're talking about these positive things, and only 6,000 talking about these negative things. But that was growing 10%, and the negatives are growing 20%. So should we do both, Dave? Should should we be saying, well, this is great, but it omits this? Should we focus on one or the other? What's your take on that?
Well, I think part of it is really, you have to look at each of these attributes, whether they're positive or negative, and to what kind of category do they fit. Some are really around what I'll call minimally processed foods. So you're going to see things like added sugars or things like non-GMO are considered minimally processed. You're going to find others that are around ethical concerns. They may be around cage-free, or any type of animal activity that's going on with the products. And so if you start to look at that, there has definitely been this whole movement toward free from food. I mean, the joke I used to say was that, in college, we always looked for free food. Now we look for free from food, free from artificial colors, artificial flavors, etc. But free from artificial flavors, free from artificial colors are part of that minimally processed side. And so there's this overarching, much more of a meta trend around this idea of processing and people starting to really push back on, I want to get more natural products. I want, the pandemic, got people to start reading labels more because, they're sitting at their table, they probably finished reading all their emails and started to read the labels on the packaging. And so the things that they started to look at was, why is this, I'm looking for something that's clean label. The RX bars, which was purchased by Kellogg's, which is a protein bar and a snack bar, they built their whole marketing campaign around clean labels. And so they have I only have 4 ingredients in here, and there's none of these binders and all these other chemicals. So I think when you're looking at positives and negatives, and from a marketing perspective, trying to put both on, you overcrowd your label. So it really comes down to what type of consumer are you targeting, and what are their values with respect to looking at? Are they valuing the ethical concerns? And so you're going to be looking much more around, cage-free, et cetera. Are they really looking at the level of processing? I mean, allergens is an important one. You can put it down as a negative, but really allergens is almost to a large degree a feature that people are looking for within their food products. So, whether it's plant-based or whether it's green or organic, which are all considered positive, having, peanut-free or wheat-free or soy-free is an attribute that is positive to some people, because that's the nature of them wanting to have a food that they can eat and digest and not make them sick or ill.
Sure, so I could see how, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dave. I could see how that would be received positively, but in our definition, you're removing that. You're removing gluten, right, or removing stuff. But I loved your example, if I could go back on that, of the RX bars, because there the point was simplicity. It only has 3 ingredients. And for all marketers, is simplicity really a piece of this? Should you really just try to knuckle down your message to just focus on a couple of things that are going to be really important to your consumers? Because when you tend to see the market today, it tends to laundry list this stuff. And is it about narrowing it list, even if it includes positive negatives, or should you really pick one side or the other of the equation?
Well, what are the top 3 things that consumers look for when they're purchasing food products?
Well, we know price.
Taste,
we know taste.
Taste, price, and then it's between convenience and healthy. And it used to be convenience was the 3rd one. And healthy is now bumping up over convenience. Why? Because everything's convenient now. I mean, I've got, every corner store, every grocery store, bookstores sell food. I can order it online. I can order it through my mobile phone. So there's been a redefinition of what is convenience. So I think the problem with a lot of these product labels with, does not contain or whatever, is like the old joke which shows this husband showing a new package of food to his wife, and he says, it has no GMOs, it's organic, there's no pesticides, there's no allergens, there's none of this and none of that, no artificial flavors. And finally she says to him, okay, you've told me what it isn't, you haven't told me what it is.
The pack of air.
I find that sometimes, and particularly with our entrepreneurs and startups, they'll be going after all of these attributes of things that does not contain, and ultimately, I say, what does it taste like? And then, so if it doesn't taste good, yet it has all these other attributes, it's not going to sell.
Right.
One of the things that I think consumers are waking up to is if you look at the plant-based meats, look at the ingredient list of the plant-based meats. It's what's called an ultra-processed food.
Right.
It has a lot of ingredients in there that are hard to pronounce, and that was needed in order to get that taste profile. And I think the kind of the genius behind, whether it's Impossible Foods or Beyond Meat or any of the others, is they focused on taste, and they're now bringing the price down to parity. And they're saying, well, people aren't, they're willing to give up some of that clean label integrity if I have a really good taste. And that's going to be the big debate, big question, big kind of discovery we're going to see is how will plant-based meats fare over time, given the level of processed food, and they are not minimally processed by any means.
I recently read an interview with the founder of Beyond Meats. I forget his name, but genius guy. And it's clear it's all about chemistry and biochemistry and talking about changing the molecules to make it taste mimic, they're now going after steak and going after bacon. So it's like, we're going to make changes at the molecular level. And that's a long way away from unprocessed, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, the issue that the livestock meat industry has is one of health, one of greenhouse gas emissions, one of animal ethics. So I think those are negatives for them as well. But I think, that's, that the balance of the two, it really comes down to who is your customer, what are you trying to sell, what is your value proposition to them? And if the value propositions are around organic and green and things like that, then it may be more positive nature. But if you're going after a consumer that is looking for things that are gluten-free, that are allergen-free, that are GMO-free, then that's what's got to be your main message. And it really, I think you really need to understand the need state. I mean, the greatest company for need state is Coca-Cola. I mean, their need state for consumers is happiness. And if you look at their mission statement and vision statement, it's all around, happiness and consumers. And so they know they're not just selling sugar water, carbonated sugar water. They're selling a lifestyle happiness, an indulgence, as something that makes you feel better.
Yeah. Let's talk about these consumers a little bit more in terms of ages. So I know from some research you shared with me before, we've seen this in other scenarios, the younger consumers frequently claim in research to be more frequently looking for healthy labels or sustainable attributes to their foods. We know they say that, so if you survey them, they will. And when we looked at the positive attributes list that I had just shared, 59% of them were from younger people under 35, the Gen Zs and the younger millennials. And so my question for you is, do these things really, from what you've seen, do they really influence their purchase behavior? Or is some of this virtue signaling? I might respond to a survey that I really want this stuff, but I go and buy the Big Mac.
I mean, the greatest example of that is green cleaning materials. I want to have my green environmentally safe cleaning materials. Well, they don't clean, they're not going to be effective. And everybody says, oh, I want to buy sustainable, I want to buy environment, but when it comes down to it, particularly food, it's taste and price. There's no first two.
Yeah.
So if you're a sustainable, green, organic, whatever, and you don't have taste and you don't have price, then you're not going to sell. So it's an attribute that is lower on the priority list with consumers. Now, Gen Z, young millennials versus boomers and X, there is a shift there. I mean, boomers and X are still looking for attributes in food, but they're looking for low sugar, low cholesterol, low sodium, things that are going to affect their diet. And I think, that's going to be an important one. Where if you look at millennials and Gen Z, it's going to be around things like, antioxidants and, no GMOs and certified organic and things. So again, it goes down to what are the personal values that consumers are looking for, and what are they trying to obtain from them. So
yep, this next chart is very much that.
Yeah.
It's these most of these are value based,
Right,
they tend to be, right? And it skews almost 60% to the young people, 40% to the older. So is it your opinion that if you're a marketer, you should have those sort of ethical sustainability messages to the younger people, and then try to focus on the older people on things that are more about, good for you, lower your serum cholesterol,
I would
something
say,
like that?
yeah, because I said, for older people, hey, I'm a boomer. I can go this way as well. I mean, values are important to me, but I'm going to be looking for things that are going to impact my health.
Right.
And so I'm going to skew more towards health attributes, which will be things like low sugar, low sodium, etc., than I will to more values-based attributes. I'm concerned about them, but I'm not going to be going out of my way to purchase products for that alone. And so I think, the chart you have here of the underage, like looking at things like plant-based 71%, important versus for 35 and older, it's only 29%. I mean, it's an interesting, that's a fairly, you're several standard deviations away. So it has statistical significance that, the plant-based side is really for a lot of younger people and millennial and Gen Z is something that's not just around health. It's also about environment and ethics. So, greenhouse gas emissions and ethical treatment of animals, where, the healthy aspect of plant-based meats, I think for boomers or 35 and older, probably is not as strong there. So, but you're seeing stronger there and around organic. You're seeing like gut health. I mean, that's one of the big new areas is this whole area of gut health and gut biome, which I think we're going to see a lot more attention paid to over the next several years.
Does that fit more with the older people who are looking for, kind of what's in it for them, or does that fit more with the younger people who may just be a little bit more understanding the leading edge of these trends?
I think both. I mean, gut health, I think we're just starting to understand it as well. I mean, the two things that I talk about are gut health and soil health. Soil health from a sustainability perspective and the ability to have real living live soil, so important, the terroir of any type of crop. And then gut health is, we got, if you read the book 10% Human, 90% of the cells in our body are not our cells. They're not our skin cells, our muscle cells, our bone cells. They're the cells in our gut that they're not part of us, but they're part of us. And we don't understand them well enough. And so many things now are shown to be gut biome related. The greatest example of that was ulcers. We used to think ulcers were caused by stress. No, they're not caused by stress. They're caused by, impacts in your gut biome. And the research now on artificial sweeteners, do they impact your gut biome? Do they change it? The impact of, any antibiotics on your gut biome. I mean, those are all things that people are dealing with. And I think whether they're young or old, it's going to be a major macro trend across generations coming up.
What category? So Danone Yogurt, Danone is one of our clients, and so gut health obviously has been important to them for a while. But what other categories do you think who haven't gone into space yet, should be mindful of gut health? Do you think that could extend to snacking?
Oh, absolutely. I think snacking. I mean, right now it's in the beverage categories and the yogurt category because they've always had the probiotic, kind of moniker to them. But I can see this in snacking, whether it's snacking bars, use of nuts and legumes, those types of things. I think it's going to get in many products, and particularly, again, the negative positive that you saw in the previous question is going to be around, does it impact my gut biome or does it enhance it? So, probiotics are supposedly enhancing my gut biome, but I guess ideally I want a neutral effect. So that doesn't do bad or good. But then there's products that are doing bad to my gut biome. So what are those, and how do I limit the negativity of that so that I don't have to go to a probiotic to make my gut biome better?
Interesting. So there's two different ways, two different angles they could play on there. I'm going to move to our next topic, and this is about internal consumption sort of stuff versus external. So very much similar to that. Are there any, so if you think about the internal or the consumption oriented, like GMO free or natural no preservatives compared to the more ethical stances we talked about, do you expect changes over time as people just become more aware of sustainable practices?
I teach a graduate program in sustainable food and agriculture, and it most consumers don't know what sustainable is. I mean, they know the term sustainable, and they say, oh, but they don't know what sustainable means. They don't know about cover crops and no tillage and things like that. Right. And a lot of these certified humane and fair trade and other sourcing practices. Again, there's a passionate group of consumers that are just all about it. And then there's a secondary group that are kind of aware of it, but the vast majority just don't know. And unfortunately, some of them don't care.
Yeah.
So I think this area, I'm hoping, becomes more part of the conversation with consumers. The areas of sustainable food production and humane and things this whole area of ESG, environmental, social, governance investing. We're seeing large corporations, the Nestle's of the world, the Walmarts of the world, et cetera, talking about ESG. And that's becoming part of the conversation with their employees as they realize, and their employees are having a conversation with their families. And so we're starting to see this filter down. It's no longer just the venue of Greenpeace and activists. It is now the venue of corporations, mainstream corporations, not just B corporations, but mainstream corporations that see ESG as an inherent part of their strategy because their investors care. And the investors are now saying, we're going to put more money behind companies that are much better at social equity, much better at sustainability, much better at transparency and governance. And so those are becoming more systemic, I guess, in some respects. So I'm hoping it spills over to consumers starting to look at things like, what's the environmental impact of this?
Now, carbon sequestration was the first social environmental requirement that corporations started paying attention to because of the activist investors and that sort of social agenda. And how is that taken among the big boards? I mean, is it being taken seriously? I know there's been some concern about greenwashing there, and I know we'll talk about that later in this presentation.
There's quite a few examples of greenwashing. I think what we're seeing to a large degree is that this whole area of greenhouse gas emissions and the whole carbon footprint is now becoming measurable, where before it was just talk. Yeah. So now we're actually using measures of carbon footprint and measures of greenhouse gas, and looking at those as part of it. Carbon trading, for example.
Right.
And so that's becoming part now of financial statements, or at least the disclosure statements that corporations are making, and the investors are looking towards that as well. So, so that I think is again, it's not just the activist investor that's pushing it; it's the mainstream investor. I mean, when you've got major, mutual funds, pushing companies towards more ESG reporting, I think that's where you're seeing that kind of flip over. And I think now, with recent, weather patterns and people, worried that it's, climate change is impacting it, whether it's fires or the heat or the flooding. I think now we're seeing companies just becoming much, much more critical because consumers care. And consumers are saying the questions. And again, it may be that small portion, but they're a small vocal portion that are saying to companies, show us that you're doing right by the environment, by social equity, and by transparency and governance.
Let me push on that just a little bit more. Let's say I'm a brand manager at Nestle or Mondelez or something, and my corporate governance is saying, look, you need to have more ESG focus. You've got to take that into account with your brand plans. Okay, got it. But do I need to worry about that for the 2022 product line or the 2023 product line, or is that kind of further down the road?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I think as you're looking at your product lines, the question is how much is your product line impacting? I think right now we're seeing much more around the supply chain. So it's around manufacturing, sourcing. Am I doing ethical sourcing? So if I'm a coffee roaster, and I want to make sure that I'm sourcing coffee from places that, where the small shareholder farmer in Africa is getting a fair share or getting fair trade in South America, et cetera. Those will become attributes that I know I'll need to do. Now, if I'm a coffee roaster that's just selling, cheap commodity coffee, I probably don't care as much. But if I'm trying to build it into a brand image and I'm trying to develop a brand identity, then that becomes part of the brand identity. And so I'm a brand marketer with a Nestle or whatever, and I have a coffee brand that I'm trying to promote as being, gourmet or being premium, I better have that as part of my brand identity, or else, consumers are going to call me out.
We had some data on this point, and this was mentions in Facebook and Instagram by topic area. And when we looked at this data, the internal stuff, this is across all ages, was much bigger component of what people were talking about than the external stuff. So ESG generally is dealing with what we put down here in external, recycled packaging, sustainable practices. So consumers are not talking about this yet. Nearly 80% of these comments were more about what's in it for me than what's in it for my planet. And you're saying, look, it's starting the boardroom, it's coming down to the employees from the board, and it's going to circulate to their families and then circulate to the rest of the consumers. And if I'm in a kind of category where I have a premium price, I had better have a plan for ESG now. But if I'm in a regular kind of snack food or a regular kind of, I won't use the word commodity, but just sort of a mainstream brand, not appealing to a premium tier, do I need that ESG strategy for 2023?
Well, again, if you look at it, it comes down to those, the priorities for buying food products. Those top internal consumption related are taste, price, and health right there. Yeah. And the ones below are not. They're the next categories, which is sustainability and environmental and social. So I think, as those ones move up, as again, we move more to values-based purchasing than value-based purchasing, you're going to see those move up. And it's not just the board. I mean, the board pushes down because consumers are pushing up. I mean, this is coming from consumers. I was in a executive meeting with a large hospitality company when they got a phone call that basically said, if they don't start using cage-free eggs in their restaurants within the next whatever time, they're going to start picketing their restaurants, on an ongoing basis. Well, guess what? They reacted to that very quickly, because what they don't want is negative publicity and picketing and all that. And cage-free was something that, they should be doing anyways. But they had to put a plan together because it would take several years to be able to move the supply chain to a cage-free supply chain. So, the consumer pressure, and again, it comes down to amplification and activism. Activism always has existed, but now we've amplified it because of social media. So you think about people that are posting on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or whatever. They're not the 99% of the population. It's again, we're dealing with probably 5% of the population has 95% of the amplification out there. And so they're the ones that are getting heard. And if they tend to be, directly related to some sort of a cause, then that's going to be the one that's heard as well. Now, if you look at consumers in general, the activists are that core. They have the biggest voice. Then you've got the kind of the next level of people that are maybe not activists, but are concerned. And they're going to be a core market. They'll probably represent another 20, 30% of the marketplace. And then you've got the vast unwashed, which are people that just don't know, don't care. And so, for a consumer brand product, you want to go after that middle core, that people that are aware, that are interested, that are kind of looking at it, are concerned. In order to do that, you've got to have the integrity that you have an authentic message with the activists. So the activists will call you out if you're inauthentic. And that's where greenwashing comes in. But you're not going after the activist as your consumer target. You're going after that next group of people, which are the people that are concerned and that listen and that stuff. And then the people beyond that, they're just buying on taste and price. They don't consider the other things. So
a lot of our clients rely on quantitative surveys with their consumers, and so they'll go out and recruit a couple hundred consumers and use a Nielsen type of company to survey what they think. And when they do that, they probably are not getting a big enough segment of that middle segment you described, a concerned, caring market. Now, you think they're about 20 or 30% of the amplification, but not necessarily 20 or 30% of all shoppers out there. Is that right? Yeah. So that method would be kind of, you'd miss those messages. You certainly wouldn't get enough activists in there. But you can watch those using social media monitoring tools. But you're not going to get those concerned people in the middle from traditional quant surveys, are you?
No, and the other side is, I mean, we're in an influencer market right now. I mean, if you look at where do people go for their dietary recommendations, number one is your mom,
right?
Family. You know, your first place you go to in recommending what you should eat is probably friends and family. And then after that, you may, if you need something, go to a doctor or a nutritionist. But most likely you're going to go to the internet and Google it, or go to a YouTube channel, or you'll get information from your chiropractor or your personal trainer or somebody else that you meet ad hoc for other reasons. And so we're getting this influencer model, which is really different than the old. Before we used to, our brand messaging was through persuasion. We did marketing messages,
Right.
This product will make you brighter, faster, smiling, or smell better. Now it's all through an influencer marketing approach, which is more, a different approach that traditional marketing is trying to catch up to, but it is constantly shifting, as you know, with the messages that are coming out through social media.
This is where I'll make a shameless plug for Simporter. I mean, one of the reasons we set this up was not just to get the influencers who you can find them with, traditional social listening tools, but it's that middle level, those people who care and are vocal, but they are spread out, and you have to use a tool. That's why we look at social and product reviews. A lot of influencers are just these little people who influence a few hundred, not millions of followers, and so those are really important for us to target.
But they're vocal, which is, I think, it's like if you're going to Airbnb or to a hotel site or even to Netflix and watching a movie, you'll go check the ratings first and you'll go read the comments.
Of course,
those are kind of those mini influencers right there, because they don't have a calling of 1 million people following them. They may, but they are active, they're vocal, they're participating.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's kind of our whole thesis, is to understand what those people think, because they're going to lead the rest of the market. We're going to talk about the gap between what consumers are posting about and what marketers are offering. So we've already established, look, consumers are posting more about some of these positives, like clean and certified organic, keto friendly, but the marketers aren't really following suit. We looked at that 8,000 odd, and this is the food industry, 8,000 odd different products. And consumers, when they wrote reviews about them on Walmart, Amazon, or Kroger, 72% of the reviews were about something positive or organic, and 26% were about, I'm going to avoid a negative. But then we looked at what the manufacturers, the brands were writing in their product descriptions. It was closer to 50-50. 52 were positive and 43 were negative. So what you see on a macro level is the manufacturers aren't quite keeping up with all those positives. And my question for you is that just that they can't get there? They aren't ESG yet? They don't have those practices in place to talk about? Or is it just sort of a lack of focus, that the marketing people just kind of laundry list what they do have and not worry about it too much? What's your take on that?
I think some of it, as you said, is supply chain oriented. I mean, it takes time to get some of these things. If you're going to be keto centric, or you're going to be organic, for example. I mean, organic takes years to get it right, particularly if you're an organic farmer. I mean, you have to, fallow your field and go to whole new practices. So some of these things are not as easy to do. Clean labeling. I mean, you've got to do a reformulation. And again, if I reformulate a product and it doesn't taste the same, I'm going to lose my customer, because the first priority for a consumer is taste.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm not going to go into putting in new ingredients in if it's going to impact, taste or price in any negative way. So I think that's part of the reason right there. And then also you got to look at trends versus fads. I mean, are some of these things just fads that are just going to come and go? And are other things real, macro trends that are
Mhm.
going to be sustainable over the long term? I
And
mean,
the
a lot of
fads could be in both the positives and the negatives, of course.
and the fads could be both positives and negatives. So I would think a lot of consumer product companies are not going to be quick to. I mean, if you're dealing with an impulse product that is very, and almost like fashion oriented, I always call the fashion of food. So food is
Yeah.
becoming like the fashion industry. You come in and come out, come in and come out. So you look at companies like, Mondelez with Oreos, where they've got, they have different taste profiles in Oreos like every month. They come out with a new flavor, and it's almost like this limited time offer, fashion orientation, and that's part of their brand message. But for other companies, doing a reformulation, doing a change is a big event, and they don't want to catch the wave at the wrong end when it's coming down rather than when it's going up. So I
Mhm.
think just slow to respond.
One thing on this chart pointing out that the conversations or mentions about packaging that would be sustainable or smart are quite low. On the manufacturer side, we did not include the traditional, this bottle is recyclable claim, because that's ubiquitous and not really a claim per
Right,
se.
right.
It's cost of entry. But you expect these two, as we talked before about how these ESG topics are going to bubble up to consumers, you would think that in 5 years that the topics around sustainable packaging and production will grow.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more about, because more companies are moving that way, it's going to be more of the discussion will be about companies that don't have sustainable packaging or don't have, any type of ethical production or sustainable production. Because I think it's going to be, it'll become the table stakes for the future.
Yeah.
You're going to have recyclable or some sort of a, deal with the issues of social equity, or deal with the issues of sustainable, recyclable, reduction of waste. Food waste is a big discussion point, particularly on college campuses. Food waste is a big discussion point. So the whole issue of recycling food, upcycling food, limiting portions, etc., are all discussions that people have. So it'll become, if you're not doing it, more of important than if you're doing it.
One of the challenges that as brands consider all these important to do and not wanting to be left behind out of what becomes table stakes in the marketplace relates to what markets they're in. And one of the interesting things we were looking at is, if there's clean or organic trends, they don't happen around the world evenly.
No.
And some of our clients have been kind of caught with markets that just didn't care about it.
Yeah,
and so the question here is there any kind of geographic flow, or do they have to just invest in each market? This is a snapshot of organic yogurt, organic Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt as a whole is $11 billion global market, but the top country consuming Greek yogurt is Russia. US is number 2 and Brazil's 3. And of the top 3, only the US has demand for organic versions. And in fact, organic yogurt in some of these markets has just not succeeded yet. So if you're in charge of supply chain for a big yogurt company or similar kind of food company, how do you deal with this? Do you have to go into each market and do primary research and nurture it and figure out what's going on? Or, I know with dairy, you have to literally certify the cows or license the cows that are certified organic, right? I mean, you're way early in the supply chain. How does a company manage that globally?
Well, I mean, I think that's it deals with the culture of the country itself. I mean, Russia and Brazil and Australia and US all have different cultures as far as their people and what's important to them. And again, we're coming down to values based. I mean, is organic healthier? Maybe not. Is organic, less calories? No. So what's organic giving you that other products don't? Okay, maybe doesn't have pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Organic milk is not without the growth hormones and stuff like that. So there's those attributes, and the question is for a society, is that a thing that matters?
Yeah.
Think about Brazil, which is interesting. It has here low for organic variety, but Brazil has actually got a different type. So you're familiar with our food pyramid that we have, about the foods we should eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and we should probably eat very few sweets and meats and stuff like that. Brazil came up with a thing called the NOVA system, which actually categorizes food not by good or bad food, but level of processing. So they go from minimally processed to ultra processed. And so they categorize food by, is this an ultra processed food or is it a minimally processed? And so put that attribute around processing rather than the ingredients.
Interesting.
And so it's again, I think, do you have to do every different country? No, but I think you could probably cluster countries together into similar attributes. So I'm sure Scandinavian countries are going to be very similar to the US with regard to organic, and similarly Germany and France. It may be different in Greece and in Italy and in Spain, where they're used to other types of products, or organic may not be as an important attribute because a lot of the product is fresher. Some of the Mediterranean countries, so I think it's going to be how do you cluster your countries so that you can get the attributes that most matter.
So clustering them would help, but you still have to do primary research to understand those consumer values, right? You can't go into it thinking this flows west to east. It just doesn't work that way.
No, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, there's some great examples of some of the major CPG companies going into new countries and ultimately failing because they just, I mean, Russia is the biggest soup market in the world, but when Campbell went in, they had a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Because they make borscht at home.
Right.
And they're not used, canned soup is foreign to them. So it's just different. You have to really look at the culture and the kind of the values of the consumers in these countries and see how
we know from our research in dairy that in Russia and Brazil, the reason organic isn't taking with the yogurt, like organic foods are growing rapidly in Russia, but they already consider yogurt to be fresh and wholesome. So to them, it's like, why add to that? Doesn't make sense.
I'm sure you'll find the same thing in Greece. The yogurt's already good.
It's already good for me.
Label on it.
Yeah, for a premium price. So I have permanently moved from hamburgers to plant-based meat patties. They cook faster, they cook more evenly, they taste better, and apparently they're good for you. I haven't made that change on other meat substitutes. And I know the industry is really focused on making more convincing versions of bacon and pork, and even steak is kind of the holy grail for plant-based protein. Where else do you think plant-based protein is going to become important that it's not yet? And then what do you think is the biggest stretch category where maybe you don't have to worry about that just yet?
Well, I think plant-based, I mean, you're seeing it already in pork and tuna and fish. Obviously dairy, the meat products, and you're just seeing a lot more innovation in extracting protein from plants. And so whether it's soya, yellow pea, canola, chickpeas, there's a whole series of ways we can get plant-based products out. I'm of two minds with plant-based products, because what we're doing is taking plant-based products, ultra processing them to mimic another product.
Right.
And, why not just get there's some fabulous vegetarian diets out there that are, if you go into India, into the, Udaipur and Jaipur and Delhi and into the Parsi influenced vegetarian diets, they're absolutely fabulous foods. And so I kind of, this whole plant-based thing I find it as a bit of a interesting development. I think plant-based foods, and particularly plant-based meats, are going to be supplemented by another thing, which is going to be cell-based meats. So the whole idea of using stem cells and biofermentation to actually create full muscle meat without an animal host, that's going to be the big innovation. And that we're seeing great advancements on that going on now. We're still probably 5-7 years away from any real significant commercial success there, although they are doing a cell-based chicken in Singapore right now. So, but I think that's going to be the plant-based meats are obviously growing. But look, last year, the livestock-based meat industry grew substantially, double digits last year. And yeah, the plant-based grew a lot too, but it still is dwarfed by the livestock-based meat industry. And the livestock-based meat industry is reacting to the plant-based by getting into plant-based, like Tyson's got into plant-based, and Maple Leaf Foods got into plant-based. And they're also changing their practices, trying to get better carbon sequestration with the animal feed, and getting rid of the cattle burps, or reducing the amount of methane coming out, and all these other things are going on. They're finally waking up to the fact that, hey, we need to be much more sustainable as well. So, I think the debate on plant-based and animal-based and cell-based is going to be an interesting evolution over the next 10 to 15 years. My feeling is we're going to see livestock-based diminish because the cost of growing livestock on the land and everything is just going to go up. I see cell-based becoming much more prevalent as the technology improves. And remember that cell-based foods, cell-based meats is not the only industry working on that technology. The medical industry and the fashion industry are also working on it. The medical industry are trying to create organs out of your own cells so you can grow your own kidney. And the fashion industry is trying to find a replacement for leather. And so, those things I think are accelerating that technology. So I think there's going to be, when you're looking for a steak, it won't be a plant-based steak. It'll probably be a bio-fermented cell-based steak, which will be, like for like.
So in the last year, when both livestock meat and plant-based meat were both growing rapidly, so we're just eating more protein as a whole? Is that sort of a function of keto diet?
People have, the keto diet plus the fact that, let's face it, in the 80s, we went through the whole low fat, no fat, which everybody got fat on because all we do is substitute fat for sugar.
Yeah.
So I think people are realizing, proteins are a necessary part. Healthy fats are a necessary part of our diets, and healthy carbohydrates are as well. So I think, proteins are coming back into play again, and people are realizing, with the keto diet and people's, again, social media and influencers around, getting into a protein-based diet can help you lose weight, and people are, whether it's correct or not, they're at least following it.
With the livestock meat producers, are they the ones investing in the cellular muscle kind of approach? Some of
them are, yeah. Some of them that I've at least put money behind some of the Memphis meats and people like that are doing it. You're seeing the innovations for that coming out of Europe and in Singapore as well, is doing a lot of work in this area. But I think I think by within 10 years, 2030, we're going to see a significant product line coming in out of cell-based meats. And as they work through the scaffolding and they are actually able to get muscle mass and things, they can now create hamburger. It's just costly, but it's basically the same technology used to make beer. It's biofermentation.
Yeah.
So the technology is advancing fairly quickly.
A shout out to our friends at Plug and Play. I know in the food beverage cohort we were in last year, they had a company doing cellular based leather. As you mentioned, that could work in that apparel category, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, the fashion industry is even more focused on this issue of sustainability and and ethical treatment of animals, et cetera, because they've been hard hit.
Right.
The fur industry and the leather industry have been hard hit in the past.
I think our last question is about. We have 2 questions to go, and we have about 10 minutes. So upcycling. So I love these young upcycle companies. For those who don't know, upcycling is taking something that's left over in some other food process and recycling it, but upcycling it into a new food, or taking the really bad bruised bananas that ordinarily be thrown out and not make it to the supermarket stores and turning into bars. So my question for you, are brands in this space going to grow because of their positioning, this values-based, wholesome, altruistic? Or do you think these guys are going to see a cost of goods benefit because they're using, leftovers essentially? Can they get once they get to scale, can they get their cost of goods down so they have a price benefit at lower cost structure?
Yeah, by promoting upcycling to consumers, I think is a losing cause. Again, taste and price are the 2 things. So if you can use upcycling and you provide a tasty product that can get a lower price point because you are using castaway products, then I think that's the marketing. It comes down to, yes, you're an upcycle product, and there's probably 1% of the population who really care.
Yeah.
But most people want a tasty product. And the fact that it's upcycled may turn some people off. And so, okay, here we go. It's a gluten-free, sustainable.
Yeah, we compared it, looking at just searches.
Nothing.
Nobody knew what it was.
Nobody knows it. And upcycling has existed it's been around since the birth of agriculture. I mean, we've always, I hear these things about ugly fruit and how we're using ugly fruit. Well, guess what ugly fruit used to do? We'd make it into juice, we'd make it into tomato juice or
banana bread,
whatever.
Everybody cooked baked banana bread in the last year.
There's a whole industry around secondary and tertiary markets. And so the upcycling, I think, is great. I particularly like it when they're doing things like with brewer's yeast and stuff like that, rather than just feeding it to cattle or actually making products out of it. So all good. But when it comes down to marketing messages, the upcycling has to be a secondary place after taste and other things, because otherwise consumers are, I'm not buying my food just because it's upcycled.
This is a good illustration of that. Now, one of these lines, the light blue, is just people searching the term upcycle.
Yeah.
It's darker blue. But the point of this, you don't have to worry about the lines, but people are searching the brands, like Superflower. So your point is, look, upcycle is not really going to be a thing with consumers. It's more about using that capability to get your taste right, price right. And do you think that if they get at scale, they have a price advantage, or do you think that in the long scheme of things, it's not enough?
It'll depend on the availability of their source material.
Uh-huh.
If they're dealing with a waste stream that is inconsistent, then that's going to be a problem. So they have to have a consistency of a waste stream. So the people that are taking the brewers mash or whatever and using it into as long as we're making beer, we'll get it.
Right.
I mean, the upcycling industry, as I said, exists for ends. I mean, the pork industry always has a saying: "We sell everything but the squeal," because they used to take the hair from the pork and make it into paintbrushes, and the various bloods and stuff were made into pharmaceuticals. I mean, there's the question is, can you do it economically? Is the source material assured enough that you can get it on a consistent basis? And are you impacted by swings in price point? Because sometimes these co-products and byproducts will have price swings based on availability and things like that. So,
but there's still a massive amount of food waste in this country, and that is from production source before it gets to distribution, right? It's the crop doesn't have a home.
Yeah, so the sources of food waste are either agricultural harvest, distribution, manufacturing, retail, restaurant, consumer.
Right.
If you look in the U.S., most of the food waste is coming primarily at retail, restaurant, and post-consumer waste. So people not eating the food on their plate.
Right.
Scraping that off, or stuff goes bad in your refrigerator. It doesn't come at agriculture. We're pretty efficient in agriculture. There is some waste there, but we're pretty good. You compare that to developing countries, whether it's India or in South America, most of the food waste comes at the agricultural harvest side of things. So it depends on the level of sophistication of the agricultural system. But I think for consumers in North America in particular, post-consumption waste, it's all about plate size. Buy smaller plates. Look at the ingredients. If you go to universities, what they've done is they got rid of the trays, because people were just piling food up in the trays because they're on some meal program. And now you have to carry your plates. And what they found is they reduced food waste by just focusing people on eating what they're served.
See, I think I was misled by the media. I thought in this country most of the food waste was pre-consumption, but most of it is post-consumption, either at retail, restaurant, or
it's either going to go
home.
Because it goes over code date at a retailer.
Yeah.
So the bread goes stale, the bananas go brown.
Right.
At a restaurant where, again, I can't, I serve a food it's not eaten, or I have product that's fresh, but then customers don't come in, so I have to throw it out. Manufacturing, there's, the food, there are food waste streams, but it's not like it's going to the garbage dump or landfill. Those food waste streams. So if I'm making pasta, for example, so I'm making all the spaghetti, I get the little end pieces at the end that I can't put in a package.
Right.
What they've done is they're ground down, they're made into flour, or they're mixed in with cattle feed or pig feed. So most of the food waste streams from manufacturing go to another market, which is primarily animal feed, or in some cases it could go into a biofuel reactor of some sort.
That's going to make it really hard for the upcycle guys if they can't get a big distribution stream early in that value chain. If they're going to be relying on stuff that's more middle value chain, that's going to be much more distributed, much harder for them to get any kind of scale.
Well, I think particularly if they're going towards the agricultural harvest or the manufacturing byproduct streams, there's already a market for those in many cases.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be bidding against other people that are buying products. So, a rendering industry, I don't know if you're familiar with what's called the rendering industry.
Sure.
It basically takes all the parts that aren't used in a slaughter facility, whether it's the feathers from chickens or the bones from cattle, and then renders them down into their fatty acids and their, proteins and things like that. I mean, they used to, the joke was always we'd get our raw materials for free and then sell them to a product. It was just a cash machine. But the problem is going to be is where you've got secondary markets for some of those waste streams, and you're going to have to outbid other people that are already using it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to give you as cheap a price as you want.
Yeah, it's not like it's free. It's not like it's a free component.
And there'll be some areas where, like for example, the stocks on corn or things like that, which are now just being, they may just be thrown away or whatever. Can you extract some protein, some nutrients from them and use them? Maybe there may be some innovations there.
But if I'm a strat planner at Nestle or Mondelez or some company like that, I'm not going to worry too much about upcycling. It's an important area, but it's going to stay niche because it doesn't have any kind of big economy of scale opportunity here.
Yeah, the only area where if I was a company like Nestle that's sourcing from around the world, I would go and look at some of the emerging markets, agricultural practices, because there may be a lot of waste on the farm, and can I use that waste? So that would be a positive
in those markets. Yeah, great. Our last topic is going back to the whole ESG notion of corporate responsibility, and greenwashing is, I would say, it's become a problem. And so far, greenwashing, for those who don't know, is when a corporation has kind of a misleading image. They're communicating some misleading information about their environmental practices to present an eco-friendly public image. We've seen it a lot in cleaning products, in household cleaning products, and some other areas where they say they're more green than they really are. And there are now some AI tools out there that can help identify this, but those are mostly focused on carbon sequestration, mostly about, is your carbon footprint really matching what you're disclosing in your corporate reports, but not so much on these other areas. So if you're in the food industry, is greenwashing likely to become apparent where everything is certified organic? Who's certifying it? Everything is GMO free. Are there any minders of the gate here, or are we at risk of seeing this just become such a ubiquitous kind of claim that consumers wind up not believing it?
Well, the issue will be on measurement. Right now, we haven't got really good measures of carbon credits and carbon sequestration, because for farms, for example, we're using satellite images to look at, whether we're using certain practices, et cetera. And, but the problem is that, you can't tell whether, patches under trees, patches under stones, it's hard to get really good measures without getting into sensor technology and actual going and visiting the locations, which is very expensive. So I think until we get better measurements, there's going to be a lot of this greenwashing, because you're basically saying, hey, we're greener than we were before. Well, prove me wrong.
Right.
I think there'll be more call outs. There'll be more, either investigative journalism or activists that'll start to call things out. And like the cage-free eggs, so at some point in time, they'll call out companies and say, hey, either you start getting better at no-till farming and green and cover crops, or you get better at reducing packaging and that, or we're going to call you out. That's where the impact will be. But I think we're going to have to see we're seeing a lot of noise in the system right now.
Are there gatekeeper bodies like Certified Organic? Who's doing the certification? Cage-free, who's certifying that? Are there gatekeepers that everybody is conforming to, or is it a little bit of the Wild West still?
Problem is there's too many gatekeepers. I mean, if you look at a sample package, you could have 5 or 6 labels from GMO-free and cage-free and all this. And so I think getting a consolidation of some of that, and the unfortunate part is that is that a government role, or is that an industry role? Who are the third parties? Do we trust the third parties? There's still all of this going on that I think is still needs to work itself out, because we don't have a single source of truth right now.
What's the big watch out for brands on this? Should they be careful about which claims they make in terms of who's auditing the claim, who's the gatekeeper?
I think it's all around authenticity. I mean, if you're going to make a claim, you better be able to stand behind it, because somebody's going to dig in and try to find out if it's really true or not. So if you're making a claim that is not authentic, that is not measurable, that is not realizable, then I think you're going to call out. And that's going to hurt big companies more than small companies. Big companies are going to be much more concerned about having some sort of authenticity to their number, because their brand image could be impacted by it. Some smaller startups could do anything. They can put anything on it if they wanted to, knowing that the fallout is not as big. Yeah. They can just pivot and regroup and do something else. So it's I think it's going to be, that is part of the reason why some large companies have been slower to get into new markets. It's just because they want to make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted before they move into it, because their brand reputation is at risk.
Yeah. Well, I want to certify that this was a cage-free interview. Neither of us were in cages for this interview, so I really appreciate your time here. I think we have a little time for some. We're actually 1 minute over, but I'm going to check the questions to see what was put in here. Dave, can people email you at this address which I put here, or do you want them to go through us to contact you? Yeah. Since I put it on there, I should have asked you beforehand.
Yes, that's too late now.
let me check what people have said in the Q&A. Where will the recording be placed? We'll have a recording. We'll send it out to anybody who wants it. How does local compare to other attributes across age groups? And that was at 11:19. And so I'm going to have to come back to our video. Salvador, this was your question. And you had a question again about translation issues, but I didn't check these questions at 11:15. So I'm going to come back to those and email you that.
And the thing about local is local is being redefined from distance to community.
That's right. Yeah. Actually, if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I saw a really interesting write-up about how since the pandemic, we've all changed our notion of what local means.
Yeah, I mean, it's all around supporting the community, around knowing people, like knowing your farmer, knowing the process. I mean, it used to be we bought our food for what it was. Now we buy it for. We also want to know is where it was made and how and where did it come from and how it was made. And so those become aspects of local. Local could be a local California winery and you're living in Michigan. So it's not just distance related anymore. It's much more about personalization and knowledge and intimacy.
Great. Well, any closing thoughts you'd like to share, Dave? You've really had you've really brought up some really amazing points. I think for all the people who are watching who are generally industry execs, this has been really helpful for them. But what would you like to leave them with as a final thought?
I'm just absolutely excited about the future of food and agriculture. I mean, I do a presentation to university students on can we feed the world, and it looks at the next 30 years and what are the things that are going to help us and what are the things that are going to hinder us. And I end on a positive note, just saying, there are just so many things going on in food tech, ag tech, and understanding the consumer, better insights, looking at taste profiles, innovation, and I work with entrepreneurs, the number of new ideas coming out is just mind-boggling. And so I'm pretty optimistic and feeling pretty good that the industry is going to be an exciting place to work for the next several decades. And we're going to see some amazing new products, and I'm excited to be part of it.
That's a great vision. Thanks for sharing that. That is really exciting. It makes me feel very optimistic too. Dave Donnan, thank you so much for joining our webinar. This has been great. I think our attendees have really appreciated this insight, and I really appreciate your time. Attendees, thank you very much for attending as well. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thanks very much. Take care.